really grateful. And we're gonna go ahead and get started here with the full program, what we're here for, building mass movements. And I'm also incredibly thankful for the panelists that have taken the time to be here and talk about building mass movements. We're going to have Kamau Franklin of Community Movement Builders. We're going to have McHenry of Food Not Bombs, and we're going to have Arun Gupta of Occupy Wall Street. And so I'm going to get ready to bring them up again. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, your family. And we're started here shortly. So here we go. Thank you, Kamau, for being here. Let's get Kamau.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you, Keith, for being here.
Yeah,
and we're
going
to get you, Arun. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Let me get this set real quick. So first, I actually want to get into a little bit of a light question, because honestly, what we're talking about here, the topics, building mass movements, building power, these are difficult, deep questions. And we're going to get into that. And the panelists, the way that they're going to go about answering these questions, it's going to be difficult. So we're going to start off a little light. This is something I've always kind of just thought about and honestly don't have a really good answer for. I always wonder, what we have the iconic hammer and sickle. We all know about it. I wonder, what would a mass workers movement symbol or people's movement symbol be? What could you imagine today? And so I'm going to kick that off to Keith first, if you want to give it a shot.
Oh, that's so interesting. Well, I designed the Food Not Bombs logo. That was my attempt. And it did spread worldwide. But it does, a hammer and a sickle is very appropriate for when there was a labor movement like that. And there was agrarian movement of people farming. Might not be, some kind of version of other what workers would use. I think, but like something about a computer, something about I don't know. But now that with jobs disappearing and all the things that are going on, it would be kind of, I don't know, maybe even back to symbols like the red rose or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I really it is a good starting point, though, for trying to figure out what would attract many people that who would be willing to organize a Black Panther fist, or or the panther, or then the fist of
Yep.
those have always been popular, but people don't even really realize why the fist exists anymore. Was used as a symbol of revolution, but so a lot of it might need education, basically, to identify with what these symbols might be.
True. Social investigation to figure out.
Yeah.
We can go to Kamau if you have any ideas.
I had one idea, and Keith, I think, mentioned it. I'm a little old school on my symbols, so I did like the sort of what I view as like a Black Power fist, or fist in the air. Fist to me has many different symbolic ideas wrapped around it. One of power, one of fighting back, one of striking a blow against your oppressor. I think a good militant symbol, one that doesn't shy away from power and working class people and poor people fighting for power, as opposed to acceptance within sort of a capitalist system, is something that I think we always need. And I think done correctly, it could very well be, once again, a terrific, heroic symbol of mass protests, mass action, and mass activism. So I'm a little partial to a fist in the air.
Classic. I like it.
Yeah.
Arun?
Well, what's wrong with a hammer and sickle? So worldwide, there's about 30% of humanity is directly engaged in agricultural labor. That's about 2.5 billion people. Another 500 million are factory workers, industrial workers, right? So at least in terms of raw numbers, there's far more people engaged in, holding a hammer, holding a sickle, the icons of revolutionary communism. Than there were certainly 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, right? In 1970, there were only 4 billion people worldwide. And I think it also ties us directly to the struggle for a socialist ideal, a communist ideal that has been going on now for 200 years, if not longer. And I think it's always good to be rooted in our own history.
I like that. And rooting ourselves in history. I want to ask y'all, how do y'all define a people's movement? Because a lot of people sort of have, or a mass movement, a lot of people have different ideas of what that could mean. Some think of building grassroots power or building electoral power, an electoral base. Some think and say that they're doing a combination of both, but in practice, it becomes building up grassroots power to funnel it into electoral power or electoral fights. So I want to know, and we can start off with you, Arun. What do you define like a people's movement, a mass movement?
So I think let's look at what exists. And I last year wrote history for the Socialist Register, which is a book that comes out every year. It's published by academics in Canada. They pick a subject. Ostensibly, it was on the U.S.-based Palestine Solidarity Movement, but they want me to dig into the roots of it. What it really is, it's a history of social movements going back to the Battle of Seattle, the shutdown of the World Trade Organization movement on November 30th, 1999, that kicked off the global justice movement worldwide and led to really stop the global free trade pact from ever coming into being. So since then, what we've seen are mass protest movements, and just mass, if we mean by numbers, movements that are drawing millions of people into the streets in the U.S. and worldwide. You had the Iraq anti-war movement, Black Lives Matter, climate justice movement, the George Floyd movement, the Gaza Solidarity movement. These are all mass protest movements, right? They're great, but it's not what we're after. We want something in the universe of a mass party, meaning that we have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who are organizing in some sort of party formation. And that does not mean by any stretch of the imagined electoral politics. It could, and we can get into this later, but I think it's important to be extremely wary of electoralism and reformism. And we see right now, I would argue, DSA going down the same disastrous path that the left has done so many times in over 100 years, thinking that you're going to somehow sow the seeds of socialism by engaging in extremely constricted bourgeois politics. So I think, how do we create a mass party? Because the point of a mass party is it's not just a singular protest movement. It engages people in all sorts of ways, culturally, politically, socially. It allows for kind of the concentration of people power, where you can basically direct energy on an issue, where you can kind of analyze the terrain and understand here's where we can really punch above our weight. And in this history that I wrote, I this is all stuff I covered also, but it was very useful to reflect on this history. Because if we go back to the Iraq anti-war movement, you had very, very small Marxist parties, Leninist, Trotskyist, Maoist. You're talking parties with like at most 500-600 cadre, and yet they were able to seize the moment and bring millions of people out into the street. And when it comes to protest movements, I'll finish with, it's really often beyond our control these days, right? And when millions of people come into the streets, it's not really anything we're doing. If we're doing the day-to-day hard work of organizing, we can help to guide and shape it, as with the Gaza solidarity protests. There was a network of Palestinian, Muslim, Jewish, socialist groups out there that had been doing the hard work for decades. And so when the genocide began, October 7th, 2003, they were able to play a leading role in shaping the movement. But absent these kind of dramatic events, it's hard for me to see how we can just build a mass party, a mass movement of millions of people. We are really starting from ground zero.
Yep. And I want to get your thoughts, Kamau, on the same question. What is people's movement as you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably have a similar answer to Arun. One of the things that I think about is I never think about, you don't need a majority. What you need is a critical mass of people who are organizing through efforts of mobilization, but also joining organizations. And so when I think of a mass movement, I think beyond the mobilizations, which have been fantastic, that we've had for well over a decade, that have sort of come out of different movements or different calls or in reaction to different events, right? So everything around police brutality, Occupy movements. We've had mass mobilizations, even particularly the first election of Donald Trump. I think where we've not necessarily generated, let's say, the mass movement, and probably the last time I think that we had mass movements were probably in the mid to late 60s and early 70s when they were killed off, was when you had a multitude of different organizations, different ideological ideas and thoughts, and groups that were on the left of the spectrum, promoting different ideas, sometimes unfortunately challenging each other a little too much, but also offering good challenges to sort of correct things or to push things in different directions. So I think when you have a critical mass of people, these mass movements can develop, and then they start taking on the capitalist state in different ways. Not only do they take them on vis-a-vis policy issues or organizing campaigns, but they also take them on by having labor movements or community-led movements, women's movements, queer movements. So I think when we talk about a mass movement, we're bringing together the different sectors or sections of oppression, and pointing those to the heart of where the oppression lies, which is the capitalist system and white supremacy. And I think for me, mass movements understand that it's these systems of oppression that must be targeted, and not just the symptoms or the outcomes of the oppression, right? Those things only get us so far, right? We can't think that just by doing some of these actions we're reforming. So for just going to reform the whole thing, to move the capitalist system will never allow itself to sort of be reformed out of power, right? That's going to take revolutionary action. But that only happens, in my estimation, not only through party formations, but also creating the vehicles for people to join mass formations who aren't yet ready, or who aren't yet party people who are ready for parties because ideologically speaking, they're not there, but they also see that there's actions for them to take. So I think it takes different parties, it takes different areas of mobilizations from different types of organizations. But I think at its core, we're talking about dozens of organizations. We're talking about critical masses of people coming out. We're talking about left of center politics that's rooted in an anti-capitalism, anti-white supremacy. And we're talking about challenging that at its core, and everything else are tactics and strategies to get there. So whether or not we venture into electoral politics at times, and I very much agree, electoral politics should never be at the center of our movements, particularly thinking we're going to reform the Democratic Party, which is nothing but the neoliberal edge of capitalist politics as represented in the United States. But I think there is victories to be won sometimes through those policy measures, but they can never be the heart of the work that we do. So I wrap up with that mass mobilizations have to have ideology at the center of their work. Otherwise, it'll be something where, they'll just fight. Any battle will be an appropriate battle, and it doesn't matter what the strategy is without the understanding of an ideological background in terms of what you are fighting. I'll leave it there.
Right. Nice. And I want to ask you too, Keith, because even with Food Not Bombs and being able to garner, international numbers, I'm still, because you call for a different sort of mass movement than the left is presenting today. So talk about, if you can, like the struggles of having the numbers, but not having maybe the agenda or the strategy to bring that connective tissue together to actually be able to act and resist. And if you could just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's we are like potentially could be the nucleus of helping start broader mass movement. But certainly, our strategy has been to make relationships locally, provide like the direct connection to people, talk about the politics of why we're called Food Not Bombs, why we are opposed to capitalism, introduce people to collective, non-hierarchical ways of organizing. And it's, the 46 years now of doing that. There's now probably a few 100,000 Food Not Bombs activists at a minimum. Now, trying to unite around issues, we did have, like during COVID, we'd have these like worldwide Zoom meetings, and we would try to come to an agreement about, like, say, a worldwide, like come up with a statement of unity against different things, and particularly against war. Our problem was that we did have people that were in former Warsaw countries, like particularly Bulgaria, a bit in the Czech Republic, who wanted the main focus to be against Hitler, Putin. That was what they were. So when we tried to come up with like, okay, they were opposed to NATO and we're opposed to, naturally people were opposed to the, special military operation, that was happening there. It was very interesting to have this weird division amongst people who thought that NATO was their savior, and even though they were radical about other things, about gay lesbian issues, about anti-racism and so on. So it was quite frustrating, really. I was kind of surprised that anybody would support NATO after what we saw with Afghanistan and Ukraine, Iraq and Libya and all that. But their background was being controlled by whatever their local mafia dictators were when they grew up. But I think that it's difficult to build a mass movement right now. I think one of the things I've been writing about actually since 2017 is how wealthy foundations are funding the controlled opposition. In particular, what we're seeing now is the Gen Z and the Indivisible, and then the other color revolutions, which they have been like sucking up the energy, particularly in the United States, for protests against the war, because of people funding that. Actually, we're also funding the NGOs that were involved in the coup in Ukraine. So that is really interesting, because whenever we've tried to organize anti-war protests here in Santa Cruz, and I remember we did one with Code Pink, and we were doing it all over the country. And we had all these Stefan Bandera people. Over half of our protests was Stefan Bandera supporters here in Santa Cruz, waving "Clear the Sky" signs and Ukrainian flags, and bragging about their association with Azov. And I was like, wow, that is like so weird. And then our other peace activists, which are extremely naive in this town, were defending them. That we should have the right for even Nazis to come to our protest and be for the war, even though the stated purpose of the protest was to be opposed to the war. Because what else is a no-fly zone
Yeah.
if it's not war? So I think, you know, there's a possibility of ultimately building a mass movement, but it's quite a challenge. And I sadly,
Yeah.
because things are so intense right now with the potential wars, like who is going, like, you know, like Indivisible was able to mobilize 7 million people because
So that's actually where I was about to go. It's
they had
interesting
millions
that
of dollars. So if we had millions of dollars, if the four of us gathered up like $20 million and we had like a good strategy and we already owned the media and we already owned all these things, we could
and
get
it's interesting to
million
me
people out.
because among the left in fragmented ways, there's more than $20 million flowing through, you know, even the anti-capitalist like ecosphere. And so it's interesting, and I wanted to highlight what you said about Indivisible and No Kings protests and these sort of mass mobilizations that really siphon off energy from movements and actually stall our ability to build mass movements. But I want to know, because those are the conditions we're organizing under, what would it look like to learn, one, from their ability to mobilize those numbers and to be able to, if so, co-opt these voter registration parades that the No Kings protests are, and co-opt that energy for revolutionary purposes. So I'll start with that, but I'll also just, we'll answer that question in a second, but just to give my thoughts on the very poignant points y'all are bringing up, the way we're thinking about it, at least with Mass Party right now and the people we're organizing with and through social investigation, and also looking at sort of the discourse and what people are seemingly ready for, calling for general strikes, politicians, but there doesn't seem to be the actual people's movement or people's organization or the mass party that Arun was speaking of, to organize resistance, to organize and be able to sustain resistance. And we're not seeing necessarily the mass organization that's even taken a crack at that. And so it seems like if that gap is present, then, to bring it back to the question, organizations like Indivisible will be able to co-opt, the spontaneous energy of the masses and siphon energy. So I wonder what y'all think about what the left can learn about their ability to mobilize those numbers. And I know we're like, they have such liberal no demands. They have such liberal messaging that, you're going to get you're going to be able to cast a wider net. But I want us to think a little deeper about just what we can learn from their ability to be able to mobilize, and if not, how we can co-opt these sort of spontaneous mass mobilizations for revolutionary purposes. And so I'll start with you, Arun, if you'd like.
Sure. So I'll be blunt. I don't think that we can co-opt these movements. I think you hit the nail on the head. I've been calling them parades. What's the line that you just use? Voter registration parades. They're not protests. They're parades. I've been to a couple of them. So one of the one I went to, I happened to be on the West Coast, was in Portland, Oregon, and that was the one in in June. So it's right after you have the ICE Gestapo is starting to invade all these cities, particularly LA, and so there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of anger over the genocide, and these parades were kind of a giant container. Right. So everyone could come into the No Kings parade. There were plenty of people there who had Palestinian flags, who had Mexican flags, who had radical politics, but overwhelmingly, and I've seen this at other No Kings events, it's older white people. And in particular, it's liberals who have basically they have had success in their lives, right? And if it's easy to construct a profile, kind of a psychographic, demographic, ideological profile. It basically goes like this. It's just like, I worked hard, I was successful, and that may very well be true, but what they don't acknowledge is all the advantages they have, right? That they became of age when college tuition was basically non-existent, when everyone who was white middle class could afford a home and had full health care coverage, that there were good public school systems. And sure, if you become like, I'm in touch with lots of liberals. If you become a chemical engineer or a medical doctor or, a lawyer, especially like an intellectual property lawyer, these are all difficult fields, a professor, kind of like a high level tech person. You did work very hard at what you did. But their attitude is essentially, and they're not even that explicit about it necessarily, but this is what their politics are based on. The system worked for me, and kind of by implication, everyone else, either they're losers or they come from some social disadvantaged group. Like, I have a friend who's a very wealthy and successful tech pro in Silicon Valley, and he, says that he thinks he's a leftist. He's actually a right-wing reactionary, and he says things to me like, why do I have to pay the student loans of these losers who got like a PhD in lesbian dance theory, so they have this sneering contempt for the left, and they do not, and the whole idea of appealing to liberals, I think, is fundamentally flawed, deeply flawed. It's based on the idea that they're a tabula rasa, and the left, we have superior ideas, facts, history, and analysis, and I think that's generally true. And so if we can just engage them and show them, our analysis will win them to our side. No. Absolutely not. They view us as violent, irresponsible children who are screwing it up for everyone else. And I'll just give you one example. My partner, Michelle Fawcett, finished her Occupy Wall Street movie, and we've been showing it and getting a lot of really good response to it. We have to clear some rights before we can release it properly. And we always get one or two liberals at screenings. We had a screening in DC, and one of the liberals there, I could just tell, and I knew her, she's a very accomplished medical researcher. And she said, and this is basically a direct quote, why can't we all just agree, the left and liberals, the rights agree, we agree on everything. We agree on housing and healthcare and jobs. And you could hear people groaning. They were rolling their eyes. Some people in the audience were going, no, we don't. And it's the base that determines the leaders of the party. And we just need to elect the right people, and they'll pass the right policies, and then we can talk about rights for Palestinians. Right? Mm-hmm. These are people who are willing to commit a Holocaust, right? Throw 6 million Palestinians under the bus, exterminate them, ethnically cleanse them, just for the shallowest, most meager political gains that are really just performative. right? You know, the genocide was fully a Democratic Party operation, 100%. They were the ones in power. They perpetrated it every single way. And these people are not on our sides. And I know may sound brutal, but having been in politics a long time, I'm just like, I've come to the conclusion that until liberals are impoverished, we don't have any chance of winning them to our side.
Mm. And before I allow y'all to answer, I just had a lot of thoughts going as you were answering. And because you were like, yeah, the left has, better analysis, better historical context. The facts are on our side, and we can't engage liberals that way. And I would agree. And the way I think about it and the way we're thinking about it is that has been a failure or a misstep of the left, and that trying to engage these people around struggle and around people's agenda that is actually brought about by a grassroots people's investigation, and bringing that to the forefront, and having the most radical of us actually presenting these agendas and these sort of mass confrontations with the state, that we can get those people on board too. Because it's interesting, when you were saying the liberal that you knew, that, and the liberal being at the movie showing, that sort of audience level, or almost like audience level support, or like an outside circle of support that's not like the internal, more developed people. But even among the left, we sort of depend on that that sort of support as well, even to a certain extent, where we're not allowing them to dictate, what the movie actually is, but we're engaging in, even on that small scale, a level of like ideological struggle, maybe with the conversation, or watching the movie and they're thinking about it. So that was an example to me of even engaging liberals on the basis of struggle, and actually carrying that to the next level would be engaging liberals, everyday people, however people politically identify, on the basis of a people's struggle. And the job of the left would be to articulate that in a way that people would feel like, they're getting something out of it, and that we can actually win, similar to the Poor People's Campaign. So yeah, I just think, I wonder if y'all have thoughts about that. Basically, I think a failure of the left has been to try to engage so heavily on the ideological front, and less so on the actual fronts of struggle. And so we're taking a back seat and allowing, agents of the state to dictate what people see as like the struggle. And so I wonder if, because just for an example, when we have gone to, we went to one No Kings, but also just more liberal leaning events, we've been able to organize with people. And in a revolutionary sense, by actually leading with our vision for struggle, our vision for, you can come into this way, and the struggle itself and organizing around that has led people to develop ideologically, because I think that struggle forces you to do that. And I think ideologically and in real life, we've just had so little of that on the left, that I think some of the onus is on us. So Kamau, if you have any thoughts, I'd like to hear what you have to think about just sort of what's been brought up, raised so far.
Sure.
And Arun,
I mean,
if you wanted to reply, Arun, if you wanted to reply after that, because I kind of addressed what you had said directly, but Kamau, you could go ahead.
Sure. I mean, I would agree that, as folks who consider themselves radicals or revolutionaries, obviously every sphere is open for winning the hearts and minds of the masses of people. And there'll be many people who go to these rallies who are going because they heard the call, because the liberals who are in charge of these rallies have the money and resources to reach them, right? And so I do think it makes sense for radicals, revolutionaries to go to those things to win people over, not to win over the leadership, because the leadership of let's say these liberal organizations, they know exactly what they're doing. They're not misled. They're not making critical errors. They are part of the system. And what they want us to do is to take the energy of people who are oppressed or feeling angry and move that back into electoral politics as the only solution, right? So they know exactly what they're doing. That's why they get the amount of resources that they get. That's why when you go to those rallies, you see a propensity to have a lot of Democrats speaking, people running for office. You have the labor union executives coming out to these rallies and demonstrations. You can see the coordination of the banners and the lack thereof of the sort of more militant sounding rhetoric and/or the lack thereof of things around that say what some of the modern fights have been things around Cop City or things around Palestine, right? So it is not up to us to go and learn from them. It is up to us to out-organize them on the issues and the concerns and the strategies that we put into play. And then quickly, I'll say, two quick examples of that for certain time periods, I think was the Cop City struggle and was the struggle around Palestine. Those were radical struggles in our more recent history, which were based on radical ideas, a radical analysis, and finding different tactics and strategies to get out into the street to mobilize and to create and to create an uproar, let's say, or a rebellious atmosphere around these things taking place, right? Particularly the Palestinian struggle. It was not endorsed by mainstream media. It was completely harassed by police and politicians. And that's when you know something is really working and or something has radical and revolutionary politics, when the state, whether Democrat or Republican, when the state begins to take action against our movements, then people may not like this hard way of understanding it, but that's when you know that movements are becoming effective, because the state, again, whether it's a Black liberal politician in Atlanta or Republican conservative politician someplace else, they will join forces to put down radical action that potentially will build mass mobilization and bring people over to a particular ideological lens. So we have to remember our job is to out-organize them. If the left has made any mistake, it's that it has not done enough work and is easily split around ideological ideas, as opposed to out-organizing our enemies. And that's where we have to put our energy into. It's when we go to these things, how do we win over the hearts and minds? But we're not going to learn from them. We're going to take their crowd away, or to put out the proper analysis and the work that's being done to bring people to our side of the issues.
Completely agree. Because literally when we were at No Kings, the actual indivisible group themselves was like, oh, we can talk about maybe, because we had people's assemblies right there on the spot, and they're like trying to contain that energy, that revolutionary energy like they do, and saying, oh, we can get together and maybe have a meeting about organizing something at a later time. But we went ahead and did it because agreed, that's what we think our job is to out organize these forces that are siphoning energy. So to that point, Keith, if you had anything you wanted to add.
Well, our indivisible rally was organized by the very people that we're fighting. So it's just, and oddly enough, or maybe not oddly enough, we were doing our meals at the same time. And so I had to drive by the edges of the No Kings mobilization, and it did not seem like it would be very useful to try to communicate with them at all in our town, because it was all wealthy white people, and who definitely were dedicated to continuing the same. Like we had Jimmy Panetta was supporting our No Kings rally, and the mayor who was in charge of the homeless sweeps was leading the call, and so on. So to me, it seemed like it was useless to try to connect with those people. I must say, a lot of them actually support Food Not Bombs in a certain sense, but their vision of it is we're a soup kitchen and we're charity and we're helping the poor, right? So, but then you have. And so that's not very revolutionary, or it's nice.
But it's super interesting that they're the only way that Food Not Bombs has been able to exist for the 40 plus years you're talking about was being able to, I don't know if capture the imagination of the liberals is the right word, but you've been able to get the resources from that class or that group of people so that you can do the revolutionary work. And been able to continue the mission despite resources or funding, and so that's really especially what I want to highlight while we have people here and the panelists here who have been a part of so much, who have so much connective tissue among the movement, and obviously not as much as we would like, or we would be further and less fragmented. But I really want to raise up just the idea and maybe allow Arun to offer some thoughts on, our persistence on the, I guess, struggling around ideology instead of struggling around where we're trying to go in the actual agenda, and how when doing that, like in the cases of Food Not Bombs, it's been semi-successful in being able to be a sustained project that keeps its revolutionary roots. So I just want to see what you think about that.
So, I mean, for me, as someone who is definitely stands within the tradition of Marxism, what I find is something really quite curious about the left is that its appeal is almost all ideological. Yet, if we were to be good Marxists, it should be as much material as ideological. And so, where not only our organizations, like I've been saying this to people, like what's the best way to enforce political discipline? You cut someone's check. Right, you employ them or pay them in some way, or you're part of some sort of like collective economic enterprise where they are dependent upon that for their daily bread, and that's not to use that as like a threat of economic coercion, but the reality is we need these kind of material forms that bind us to each other. Words and ideas are great, absolutely necessary, but the bonds are not very strong. And when you go back to, kind of the socialist parties before World War II, even they were kind of like problematic because they were already compromising with the bourgeois state, right? We get the parliamentary road to socialism rather than a revolutionary approach. But nonetheless, they were based on these dense networks of trade unions, working class neighborhoods. You had working class cafes, theaters, union halls, all this whole kind of daily life, that could sustain the movement, beyond the words. Like in New York City, it's so hard even just to find a meeting space. I know groups, revolutionary groups, are just constantly tearing their hair out, for their monthly meetings, trying to get a simple meeting space, and and then go to a bar afterwards, right? This is thin ground on which to build revolutionary movements. And I'll just add that, of course, we want to resist, but it's also, I think, more important to keep the socialist horizon in perspective, that we want to create a fundamentally different world, of how the economy works, how family works, gender, public space, education, all these things, that we want to decommodify all these areas in life. And we need some sort of, like, polyculture of non-capitalist economic systems, and we're just so far away from it. But I find that people aren't even engaging with these big questions, and they're incredibly difficult, and there's no easy answers, but we have to look the problem head on.
Yeah, I love that, because that's exactly what I've been feeling, especially in the US left, is that, like, there's even a gap in the actual questions being asked. And just to, echo what you're saying, it has to be an actual integration, like J. Edgar Hoover said about the Communist Party of the time, that they had infiltrated, is his word, but they had integrated themselves in all parts of the American life, and that's particularly why they were so dangerous. Civic organizations, churches, obviously labor unions, and it seems like there's a gap of the mass organizations that are really doing that work. And you raise up an important point that we look at a lot. And Monica M. White, who wrote Freedom Farmers, excuse me, she actually looks at it as community or collective agency, and that builds community resilience. And so we just look at that, like, collective agency builds the capacity to resist. And so we also have to be looking at how we're building upon our collective capacity to just live, and addressing those needs is going to allow people to struggle even further. And so it's like the big question of, like, where do we start, and how do we actually how do we actually kick off the momentum to be able to have those resources? And it is the big question. And you brought up nonprofits, and or you brought up the way to engage people is paying them, and cutting them a check. And so that brought me to the question of nonprofits and this, like, left real ecosphere of that in the United States, and how we reconcile, obviously people needing to live, people needing to eat, in these organizations, sometimes allowing people to do that through movement work, but possibly our infrastructure that is able to build collective capacity is suffering and being underfunded. And so I just think about how we reconcile that. Another big question, but I'll throw it to you, Kamau.
If I could just add one more thing real quick that I forgot.
Please.
I just wanted to say, like, I would highly recommend reading Detroit, I Do Mind Dying, if anyone has not read it, because I forget who the kind of, maybe Kamau knows, the main kind of like strategic thinker. His vision was to create this network of community centers, bookstores, theaters, cafes, film houses, right? This dense network of culture to sustain, build, and grow the movement, right? So they did have this, like, material vision, and we need to get back to that.
Nice. I wrote it down. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. Today a lot of folks are calling, a build and fight strategy, or I see in the chat sort of the reworking of the term dual power, to also mean, as you struggle against the state, what infrastructure or what structures are you building that can show people that the left can build a better life? And I think, like as has been said, that you can incorporate your everyday living into sort of the ecosphere, or an ecosphere of living your politics in some ways, right? So that you don't always feel abandoned or lonely or alone. And I think part of the challenge of the left has been, obviously, with the anti-capitalist politics, it also makes people anti-infrastructure and anti-building.
Mm,
And it makes us easily attacked all the structures. And again, there's a lot to attack around nonprofit structures, but we attack all the different vehicles that we may be able to use that in and of themselves are not revolutionary, but in the hands of real revolutionaries, they can be of some value. They have to be looked at, they have to be watched, they have to be controlled. You have to make sure the resources are going to the things that will build power, right? And not into big paychecks, as unfortunately they usually do go into. So we have to think about what are the different structures and the different things that we create, that we control, that we run, that also are alternative models of what we want to show people that we can build, right? And I always go back to this really quickly. The biggest organizations that have been radical in the Black community have always been organizations that can relate to the community fabric of the community, right? By creating cultural institutions, businesses, not always cooperatives, but businesses that show people that we can do things or build things, right? By having folks who have had uniforms and different ways in which they express their integration within the larger community by doing free medical clinics, nurses operations, the survival programs, breakfast programs, and all that kind of stuff. So integrating the idea of fighting the state while at the same time trying to show what some of the alternative institutions look like that allow us to, again, get more people to want to be a part of a left ecosystem and join movement and have something to fight for, right? So not only are they fighting against the state, but they're also fighting to protect things that we have. Now, again, I want to be careful about this because we can also turn conservative if we get when you build infrastructure and you start wanting to protect what you built. And then a lot of times some organizations then make alliances with the state because they want to keep their fiefdom,
mm.
right? They want to maroon themselves or so forth. So we have to be cautious and careful about that. But at the same time, being cautious and careful does not rule out the try that we have to make in order to bring more people into a left ecosphere and have them dedicate their lives. And again, I completely agree, have their livelihoods depend on a left fabric as opposed to having to work in the capitalist system, right? So I think those things really matter. I think they are big ideas. I think there are things that we don't spend enough time not only thinking and doing, we don't spend enough time trying to implement them. And I think that's another part of the struggle that the left has to engage in without stopping the forward attacks on capitalist systems. And I will wrap with this part. So I definitely think ideological grounding matters. I just think sometimes, as been stated, we let ideological fights take the place of real action and real work in the community, right? And so we'd rather have a talk fest than an organizing fest, let's say. So I think that's something that we on the left have to be completely wary of, because sometimes it feels like people would rather there be 10 organizations of 5 people as long as they have some power within those organizations, as opposed to 2 organizations with 25 people each or something like that. People are not building the way we should be building, because if we're going to take on an international monster of capital, we have to be able to build organizations that are not just local, not just national, but transnational in terms of its scope and its ability to fight back.
Cool.
I mean, I completely agree. And that's why we think about it as coming together surrounding struggle, because we've seen like the debates and the tireless back and forths and the meetings where the coalitions are just trying to be built without necessarily a reason or an agenda that they're looking forward to. So we just think about the left coming together surrounding struggle, because everyone here, everyone on this panel and people watching understand how fragmented and how difficult it is when you actually get into these meetings to try to build coalition. People really are focused on their own thing, and sometimes not even because it's the most politically effective or necessarily has the most political consequences, but just because that's their political thing and that's what their org is focused on. And there's not necessarily a unifying struggle that is big enough, larger than the program to bring people together. And I think, and for me, I've kind of seen this, that I believe once there is that unifying struggle, that the resources will come, that we'll be able to actualize some of these things that we need to offer the masses to build capacity. So we're very inspired by place-based organizing, and places like MST Brazil, obviously the Zapatistas. I went to a Zapatista conference, a meeting where they invited people all around the world to come and to struggle around the ideas of, how we're challenging power. And we lived amongst them for 2 weeks. And it just really like made me realize the gap in the US, and like we really don't trust each other to do things like that. And I think, we don't trust each other. We definitely much repression as the Zapatistas stand to face, and the consequences that they're really up against as far as defending their territory. And even with that, they're organized. They're going to organize it very structurally and take the precautions they can, but they're not going to let that stop them from opening up their territory for struggle. So I was just very inspired by that, and trying to think about the ways in which the left can come together and unify around struggle, and let that be what has us in the meetings together. Let that be what we're talking about. And I feel like that sort of trust that could lead us to be able to do that place-based organizing on a bigger scale and with more revolutionary intent would be possible. Because I do want to ask y'all what you think about at this point, probably thousands of off-grid communities, different land projects in the United States that don't necessarily have the revolutionary politics that we have, but some of them have close to the same, and maybe not action behind their politics. But I want to hear what y'all think about land as a tool for capacity building. And I guess that kind of couples with housing being one of the main material interests that we offer people, and just how y'all are seeing that. So land, place-based organizing, and using that to actually resist in the same way that like MST Brazil with the peasants movement is able to do. Like they're taking, occupying, and then living in territory, but also holding mass protests that actually shape the country's politics. So I just want to throw that out there, and we'll hear from you, Keith, if you want to start.
Yeah. So we did have land in Taos, New Mexico, where we and we had like a whole system there where we taught like gardening and natural building, and we had a pirate radio station, and then we did the Food Not Bombs meals, and we collaborated with other projects in the community, and then Food Not Bombs itself. So in my second book, Hungry for Peace, and in the third book, Anarchist Cookbook, I outline like a bunch of different projects that were autonomous, that were trying to meet the basic needs of people, but from a perspective of being people with very little money. And so, for instance, we had Homes Not Jails, where we took over in San Francisco in protest to the savings and loan crisis. We had keys for 400 buildings, and we housed homeless people in 100 of those buildings at any given time. And then we would also do housing takeovers of buildings we knew we couldn't control, but were politically volatile. So, for instance, we took the first action. We housed a bunch of people in a building, families, for Christmas, on Thanksgiving morning. But also, we took over what was going to be a luxury hotel across from the main soup kitchen in San Francisco Glide Memorial Church. And when the mayor came, we like hung banners out of which one of them was Homes Not Jails. Then we also had our own, we started this thing called Indie Media, and then built websites and started to get the word out about that. Particularly when we had a world gathering in '95 where we had our first convergence center, our first indie media FM radio station, and the first indie media website. And the fact that so many people came from all over the world, then when they took the indie media back to the rest of the world, it really did become a network by the time of the World Trade Organization protests in Seattle. Then we also have like a Food Not Lawns project, and so we just tried to develop using this basically the same model as Food Not Bombs, but just in every aspect of how to survive. Now, so we have like tested that. We did it for many years. We've done it for many years, and so there is like kind of a base of like thousands and thousands of people who have direct experience of the challenge of trying to do the logistics of all these different things at the same time provide food for sustained action. So we're very involved in Occupy and helping organize kitchens, lending our equipment out for that. We had an agreement to never use the name Food Not Bombs in these kitchens because we wanted to keep it a more of a mass movement that wasn't attached to any one organization. So we figured if we started to do that, then everybody would do that. That would kind of undermine a lot of the effort that was going into Occupy. Interestingly, after Occupy, we were approached in San Francisco to teach people nonviolent direct action, as they were saying, at this thing called Occupy. It was a 99% spring, and halfway through this big meeting of about maybe 100 people, that when the lunch break happened, more than half of us left because we realized it was just a co-optation by the Democratic Party. Because when we challenged them about like, well, the whole purpose of Occupy is because the system have screwed all these people out of their homes and out of their jobs. And why would the Democrat, and then you had Obama, of course, crush Occupy and bail out banks and let 5.5 million families lose their homes. So their demands had nothing to do with really what the 99% really would be concerned with. It was just another. In fact, I wrote in my Substack, Controlled Opposition. I outlined our experience of that and a number of different attempts at organizing mass movements that then you would have the Democrats try to, like with the No Kings thing, fought to take it over. But so now the thing is that where would we have like in 500 cities in the U.S. there's a Food Not Bombs activist. Part of our idea was not to be it was that you got to learn about the politics by doing the tasks, so that you end up like hanging with poor people because that's who you're helping share food with. That's who your coworkers are. Many of the people volunteering in your group actually live outside, so then when you have meetings, you have, we also have had a rule when we first started Food Not Bombs, never have, if you didn't go out and feed people and do street theater or a protest, you couldn't have a meeting. You had to have some outside on the street event happen between meetings, because we saw that many groups would have, like I was very involved in the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. Well, we just had meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. Then we'd have an event once every 2 months, and I was like, no, that's just really not going to work. I think there is popular appeal in a thing like Food Not Bombs that draws in mainstream people into getting a political education, because they're dealing with they're learning, like, why are these people living outside? Why these people that have apartments can't afford food are depending on Food Not Bombs, and then how it is that we, without we can all work together and actually end up feeding 200 people with, starting out with relatively little resources, and that can be done day in and day out and for years and years and years. And it's just been, and it works at every. Even in like the Philippines, Indonesia, and Africa, it just keeps happening. And it's just and some of the groups are celebrating their 25th anniversary, the 30th anniversary. Just
Yeah,
it's
people's
mind blowing.
ability to come together surrounding actual struggle, like we've been saying,
Yeah.
and that works a lot of times. Like we've been in Food Not Bombs Houston, and I mean, just the ability to solve problems because people are focused on getting this task done. It really works well. And you mentioned Occupy, and I want to touch on this because resources is such a pivotal part of the conversation. I want to more because I feel it's that
You're breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, you're crackling.
You're breaking up on your mic.
It's got something to do with probably with the software.
No, it's breaking up. You're doing good before, but
Yeah, all of a sudden it just
breaking up.
started falling apart. Yeah. Maybe move your mic away from the computer or something like that. I don't know what.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna jump in.
Yeah. So you figure out what to have to get that solved. Yeah.
No, I'm gonna jump in because we can't.
You know, maybe you should sign off. I mean, I don't know if you can sign off and keep the live stream going.
Yeah, I'm gonna be a good organizer and help you out a little bit.
Yeah, we all have to work together. Okay.
Until you can fix your sound. So just on that same vein of structures that we have to build, like my organization is Community Movement Builders, and again, we take heart to that. Like we're part of a larger coalition called People's Network for Land and Liberation, which has gathered together several different organizations that have land projects so that we can work together. We're working on fabrication labs, 3D printing labs. We're working to build out larger cooperatives with each other, how to work and organize across states with groups that have land. We ourselves, CMB, have a land project called Love, Land, and Liberation, 13 acres of farm that we own as an organization that we're starting to grow food on, again, doing value-added products, growing food to be used as part of our survival program. We have workforce housing for organizers, so we are digging deep into community in Atlanta. We own 5 houses currently. And in those houses, we have organizers who, in exchange for cheap rent, they organize in the community. And so we're providing space for radical organizers to get together and build together and go out into community and try to organize with people. And so I say that to say that we understand that these things are models. We also have Black Liberation Media, which is a collective of different organizations and individuals which come together to talk about issues of imperialism within the Black radical tradition, issues of food sovereignty, issues of self-determination. And so I said it to say that we believe deeply in creating these models of alternative institutions, using land, as Malcolm said, the basis of revolution is land, using land as a basis in which we do our work and organize. But again, as Keith was mentioning, to make sure we're clear, we understand that none of these models in and of themselves will grow sufficiently enough to replace the state, right? The state will have to be challenged. Capitalist greed, the hoarding of resources. No organization can take the place of what the state does. And if you can't just leave the state alone, because it's not like they're going to leave you alone. And so all of these actions on the ground, these models, this building has to also come with the resist model of organizing against the state, getting people to understand the role of capitalist states, the capitalist enterprises in oppressing us, getting people to understand how white supremacy sort of inoculates the white working class from thinking that they are part of a working class, and how that needs to be struggled against and fought against, and that all of these efforts have to be combined in order for us to organize.
Yeah.
Jamil, how's your mic doing?
Did you come back?
I still want someone else can jump in.
Better. Yay, it's great.
Yay,
Okay,
it's
nice.
Clear. Perfect.
Oh, thank God. Thank y'all for telling me too, because I've seen a lot where people just like let it keep going back, but I really appreciate that. And your emphasis on land and what CMB is doing with land, because again, that has been so inspiring. And of what y'all were even doing with the Malcolm X grassroots movement, and you and Kali Akuno just developing like really strategic ways to orient ourselves with political organizing today. And it's some of the most politically strategic like work that I've seen, and we've just been super inspired by it. And obviously basically trying to build a multiracial mass version of that. And speaking about Occupy, like I was saying before, it's interesting because Occupy and Arun especially, and also Keith, like you were saying, experts, but there was like Jay-Z donated $1 million to Occupy, and then obviously other resources, a lot of other resources coming in. I don't remember the exact figure, but it was in the millions that the New York General Assembly ended up like ending with. And this, and just thinking about that, it brings up to me that the left isn't underfunded. We're just underorganized. We're not organized enough, and we don't have the enough of a vision towards building capacity, building out infrastructure, like you're saying. And so I guess it's a big question, but how do we think about it? The way that we think about it is that if we have enough of a unifying struggle, then the resources will come from philanthropic, even type people, but we'll use it to our revolutionary advantages. And so that's how we think about it. We have literal trust fund millionaire babies that are saying that their fight for life is to overthrow US capitalism. And so, I mean, I think it feels like the resources are there, but like the plan, the agenda, and the actual organizing isn't there, that's able to capture like a mass base. So yeah, anyone can jump in. Arun, you can, because you're so familiar with Occupy.
Yeah, I mean, I've covered all sorts of social movements, and I'd say, like, to any of us, obviously, million sounds like a lot of money, but it's not really that much money. Even in Indivisible, I looked at their 990s. I think they have around 20 million. But you look at Turning Point, the Hitler Jugend of Charlie Kirk, that had close to 100 million. It was funded by billionaires. But on top of that, both the night before the No Kings protests, I think it was in October, I was at a friend's house, and MSNBC was just all No Kings, right? And to have that type of media promotion is incredible. And you have this right wing media ecosphere that does the same thing, and these are massive, and like I said, it's just like, look, do you really want to be on the same side of a movement being promoted by Comcast, $100 billion media conglomerate, supported by Hillary Clinton and a friend of Jeffrey Epstein, David Brooks and James Carville? I mean, these are all horrible people. And so, it's sure you could do, I think, something significant. Like, I could make a national publication, a sustainable national publication with a couple of $1 million. But, when you look at the outfits that actually do hardcore organizing, though, there's lots of criticisms we can make, which are the labor unions. Their budgets for, so like SEIU, their Fight for 15 campaign, which I wrote a lot about and was more a march on the media than an actual organizing campaign. They probably spent hundreds of millions of dollars on that. And the other unions, they some of them are sitting on, like, they have war chests of well over $1 billion. But speaking to what Kamau said about, institutionalization, they're all running and hiding, right? They're so afraid of Trump that they're doing nothing, even though they are some of the best organized sectors, left of center. And I think it's interesting that we haven't even talked, when we're talking about working class and mass organizing, we haven't talked about the unions, and that's because of all the problems with unions. Most of them engage in business unionism, But on the question of land, I think what Kamau is the houses thing. I think that's really interesting, though. It does make me wonder whether they have to expend time like negotiating personality battles. What do you do if you have like someone who turns out to be a slacker? How do you remove them? Someone who's an abuser. It's dialectical. Every choice creates unintended consequences, right? And so we have to. That's why I'm like, sure, like I'm saying, we're the left-wing billionaires. It would be great if there were like anti-capitalist billionaires, but that comes with its own host of problems, right? Then you're dependent upon this one person, what they want to do. You don't necessarily have any control over the funding, what type of project they want to engage in. They could pull the plug at any moment, even if they're well-meaning. Are you building real sustainable infrastructure? So, kind
Exactly.
of on and on and on. The land thing, I think, this country, the history of America is the history of utopian separatism. So
Mm.
I would also caution against the idea of like, we saw that post 1960s with the defeat of the new left, the white new left. There was a back to the land movement, right? Thousands of radicals moved to rural areas. They birthed the organic food movement, co-ops, but it became eventually turned into the organic industrial complex. It's been taken over by capitalism. There is no technical solutions, technocratic solutions to the problem of capital. We have to have very clear, socialist communist framework to build a new world. So MST, my understanding is these are landless peasants, right? These are people who actually know how to farm, who are hungry, and that there is land that is being, like scooped up by, rich people. So there's a need, there's the resources, and, there's a mass of people. Like here, you're not going to find anyone who wants to grow their own food in this country. It's extraordinarily difficult to be a subsistence.
I would push back a little bit on that, especially with like food insecurity. I guess if people knew how, are you saying like just because of the labor it would take to grow their own food, like American laziness type thing?
So one of the main areas. So I'm writing a whole book about food, and it's one of the main. It's really the main area I study, right? People. I have lots of friends who they grow like a bushel of tomatoes, some peppers, and kale, and I have one friend who's like he calls himself a farmer, and I'm like, you're not a farmer, right? You're not growing grain. You're not. You have to have. And I know Keith's going to disagree, but this is a brutal reality. You have to have animal fat, right? Where are your chickens and pigs and ducks? You need fat and protein. It's very hard to get those from a farmer as a plant-based source. Now, we eat way too much animal products, but nonetheless, when you think about what humans actually need, it's not just fruits and vegetables, and it's the other stuff, the oils, the starches, the fats, the proteins, that are extremely difficult to integrate into a farm system unless you actually come from a community. Like I've actually interviewed subsistence farmers in Central America, right? They've done this generation after generation, and they know what they're doing. And I imagine it's the same way in Brazil with the MST. Here, like all people know is to go to the Walmart or the dollar store to fill their basket with ultra high processed foods. They don't have
And
the
then
fresh flu.
yeah. And it would be the left job then, or the organized left job, to reorient people's relationship with food. And that would be like the organizing project. So like Kamau with, I think collective food production is how we're gonna get out of that American like exceptionalism of like, oh, I just want to go and I want it to be easy. And so yeah, because people have been receptive as we're canvassing neighborhoods for our backyard gardens. It's very in line with like uh, food, not lawns, like Keith was talking about, but also not just setting people up with their own personal garden, but implementing that into like a community program where they're going to spend some time volunteering at someone else's garden, learning some things, and also other people volunteering at what they're setting up. And so, yeah, I think even for the left is like, it seems like we have a lot of imagining to do, and a lot of like visionary work to do to like present and formulate a people's agenda. Who was, I think it was Dr. Mariambe Ali. I'll link it maybe in the show after, but she was saying that the failure of leaders today is that we're supposed to have, you know, a radical agenda, and we're supposed to have uh yeah, a vision to where we're trying to go. And that has been sort of the failure of the organized left today, is like really presenting something that people can believe in, and something that people can believe will work and is a good use of their time. And on a mass collective scale, I think we've obviously had really hopeful pockets of it in fragmented ways. And that's also super inspiring, because we have some of the lessons from those projects to be able to put that towards a mass collective orienting. And yeah, like you said, MST Brazil is in a particular scenario where they have landless peasants that they're able to organize. But I mean, we have hundreds of thousands. We have a lot of homeless people. I'm thinking of Texas, but just across the entire United States. And, you know, Marx and the lumpen proletariat, with that term, we found that there's so much technical and practical skills that a lot of these lumpen have, and that they have been downtrodden so much by capitalism that these skills haven't been honed in on. But uh, in how we're seeing it, I think the skills are there. I have a hopeful, I guess, outlook on the people, the masses, and what they're capable of, especially with a little bit of the right organizing. Obviously, that's an understatement. It'll be a lot of the right organizing, because, like y'all mentioned, like we've taken a lot of cracks at this over the last 50 years, and we're not any closer, or I wouldn't say any closer, but we still don't have the mass people's movement that we truly want. And we might not have, you know, anti-capitalist billionaires, but we do have self-proclaimed anti-capitalist millionaires that are saying that they're waiting to bankroll the actual confrontation, the actual collective resistance. They put it in terms of a socialist party. A lot of people do. But with mass party, we think it can be obviously across multiple political ideologies, and it doesn't even need to present itself necessarily with one framing or one political ideology. But I just want to, in the last 30 minutes, really talk practically about what y'all think, considering all this, considering that it almost seems like we have all the necessary ingredients for the soup, but like we just haven't like put it together in the right way. So I want to know what y'all think, like the call for people in this moment is right now. I'll start just to give y'all a second to think about it. What I really think is we have to be having more conversations like this, so that we can challenge ourselves to think about these difficult questions and try to actually answer them and then act on that. Because again, a lot of these panels, a lot of these research institutes, a lot of these intellectuals are talking about needing the mass people's movement, but like we're all saying here today, it's very sparing and fragmented, and we aren't seeing the mass collective attempt at that. So I want to know what y'all are thinking about, like what the moment is calling of us right now. And we can start with you, Kamau.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to keep it brief. It's a lot. I think the moment is calling, as something I stated earlier, still for me is organizations that are mass in terms of structure and of reach. And so that at the same time we're battling the state, we are creating these alternatives that, again, to me, are models. I don't believe, infrastructurally speaking, we're going to reach the level of being able to feed millions of people unless we're actually taking over the state apparatus, right? The means of production, to be blunt about it. Like those things, unless the state is falling and we're replacing it, at the same time, we have to be taking it over. And those things cannot be ignored, shoved to the side for pet projects or smaller projects. Those projects serve as models of what it looks like for organizations and collectives to build, to inspire people. But in and of themselves, in my humble opinion, they are not the revolution, right? They never will be. And so within that, like, although I know we've talked about the outside resources that we get from people who are not ideologically aligned with us, whether or not that is entrepreneurs, whether or not that is foundations. Of course, I say for the most part, not exclusively, but for the most part, use that money wisely to build operations. But also remember that for the most part, also that when the shit hits the fan, most of that money will go away. Right. So that is not money that we can depend upon when really people are going to start working on radical ideas and projects. The Palestinian movement was not funded in terms of the encampments. They were given money by maybe third party organizations who got money from these big foundations. But as we can see some of those monies were run dry. So when we do get access to some of these resources, we have to think of ways in which we use them to either buy land, housing, things that we can integrate that can make resources in other ways. Dues is extremely important in terms of organizations still, I think, today. And so, we have to figure out ways in which these organizations are supported by the people, and not too much supported by wealthy individuals or wealthy institutions, because that will never lead fully to revolutionary goals. Because again, those folks will either pull out when they get nervous because the state will attack, or when the radical ideas become too materialized, they may be like, whoa, that's a little bit too much what we had in mind. So I just think we have to keep that kind of stuff in mind. But the biggest thing for me is building organizations that reach a level of bigness where they can actually challenge and or be noticed by our people, and not just noticed by social organizers, social movement organizers, and activists. The names of our organizations are mostly names that we recognize. They're not necessarily the names that the masses of people recognize as the organizations that are fighting on their behalf and or fighting with them. We need to get big again, as the Communist Party once was a household name, whether people liked them or didn't like them, as the Panthers were at one point, other organizations that we can think of. Our organizations today, collectives today, need to think about growth in that way, because that is the only way we're going to get a critical mass of people to join and to fight and build with us. And so I think that, for me, is the big question on the table as we fight all the daily fights that we have. I'll stop there.
Nice. Arun, if you want to take a crack at it.
I'll be honest. I'm pretty pessimistic. It's I agree with what Kamau said. When I talk to especially I find like kind of two of the best groups of organizers are labor organizers and immigrant rights organizers, which you could argue in a way is they're doing labor organizing, right? Because why do immigrants come here? They're especially economic immigrants. They have a much higher workforce participant. They have a workforce participation rate of 70% as opposed to 50% for people born in this country. And so, in terms of like building a working class organization, the labor organizers I talk to argue with me, we need the unions, but I'm like, yeah, where are they? You saw SEIU, which has loves to boast about how big of an immigrant workforce it has, or a membership it has. They have been almost completely absent, and their leaders were viciously attacked in L.A. by the ICE Gestapo, and then they held like one demonstration in D.C. That was their response. You have the Teamsters who are sucking up to MAGA fascism, and the rest of the labor unions, NEA, the biggest union, National Education Association, 3 million members, they're putting all their hopes in a legal strategy. They have spent decades demobilizing the membership. I think the immigrant communities are militant, they're radicalized, and they're also terrified because of what's going on. And it's hard to create kind of a public movement of a community that is being hunted by a Gestapo. Volunteerism only goes so far, kind of like the ideological socialist, the Leninist, the Trotskyist organizations, they're all tiny. I mean, they're very capable of punching above their weight, but some of them have serious sectarian problems. They will damage movements for their own self-interest, and in particular, as I was covering the Palestine Solidarity Movement, and I'll name names that I saw this repeatedly with the Party of Socialism and Liberation, that they're more interested in building their formation than building a mass movement and sabotaging that, and they have a history of doing this for decades, so it's nothing out of character. So the one thing, I'll go back to, things happen, we can call them black swans or whatever, that we have no way of predicting. We had no way of predicting October 7th. We had no way of predicting the confluence of the, brutal social media murder of George Floyd during in the early stages of the COVID pandemic that was a racialized pandemic from the beginning. We had no way of predicting Ferguson or Occupy Wall Street, all these things. And I think one of the real problems that I grapple with all the time, and again, I'm not sure how to answer this, is social media. The nature of organizing has fundamentally changed because of social media. You have a lot of opportunists, you have a lot of grifters, you have a lot of like red-brown syncretism, so people who like want to act like they're anti-imperialist but cozy up to fascists. And again, I'll name names because I used to be friends with him, Max Blumenthal and the Gray Zone. They're horrible. Horrible politics. They apologize for Assad, apologists for Putin. For just it's the campism that PSL also engages in, and they can build a very big following and basically warp political movements. When I talk about money, I'm not talking about nonprofits. I'm like thinking somehow we need to create our own enterprises, potentially. I'm not like a big fan of workers' co-ops because Rosa Luxemburg, I think, properly criticized workers' co-ops as buying cooperatives, right? The reason that they succeed is you're able to buy things at lower prices. It's still a capitalist enterprise ultimately. But, perhaps they could be part of the solution, and Mondragon is also, it's a lot more problematic, the network of cooperatives in Spain. For one, it was started under the fascists in the 1950s. So it wasn't like it was a socialist ideal. So, I put my hope in the resilience of people and that there will be some sort of explosion that galvanizes people. I think we will see something significant around the immigration stuff. The problem is things are getting more and more violent, and I think I can see and hear. I'm not a pacifist, but I think pacifism is kind of a white left pathology. But I think it is deeply, extremely problematic to try and take on the state with force in any way. And the problem is I think I hear from more and more people just the rage is boiling over against the Gestapo. So, hopefully there'll be something that galvanizes people. It was nearly 3 years into Obama's first term that Occupy Wall Street happened, right? So these movements take time to gather steam and orient themselves when the political situation changes.
Awesome. And just to jump in really quick, that's what we're also looking towards. And we've seen so many times that those periods of galvanization don't lead to necessarily organization. And so we're trying to position Matt's party to not only organize the mobilization so that you have some sense of revolutionary tendency to it, and also being ready for the spontaneous uprisings that do happen amongst the masses. Because if there is not the mass organization to capture that energy, we will keep on being in the cycle of these containment strategies that the state has with different liberal orgs. That'll continue to work. And it won't come as like the galvanization, and through that, the organizations will just spawn up. Like there's fragmented orgs that are sort of birthed, and organizers that are birthed through movements like George Floyd, but we do see that mass collective organizations do not necessarily come out of these spontaneous uprisings. So that's also what we're hoping for, but also being being proactive and looking to organize and almost beat the state to certain mobilization tactics, because there's already politicians calling for a general strike, or those same labor unions that are captured that we're talking about. And then, their aims are going to be non-revolutionary ones. So being able to, utilize that and come together on that basis, on the basis of a strike and occupation happening in 2027. And so, I wanted to hear from, I think, Keith, you were about to say something before I jumped in. So, just on quickly what the moment calls for, and also what formations or what hope you're seeing as far as like mass collective resistance.
Wow. So one of the strategies of Food Not Bombs is to just always be there, and to keep building personal relationships and having a structure that is ongoing. So when something does pop off, like Occupy, we're available to bring the people associated with us into that movement, and that we have practical logistical ability to help, in our case, provide food and meals to people at Occupy, and other logistics that we're used to, because that's what we do all every week, is practical logistics to keep things together. Um, I think that there could be like some, as I say, black swan type events here shortly that could be harnessed in some way. But it's the strategy of how to unite all of us to actually one take advantage of it, to have like a unified strategy. That with a kind of a goal that people can resonate with. That is like something people can go, okay, if we join these people, then this kind of thing's going to happen, and that's to our benefit. So we want to, work with them. So, but and that's where we don't really have a really clear. The left hasn't really had a specific. Okay, we do these things. What if the government dissolves? Because it's like committing suicide. Then what do we replace it with? And so that there's lots of very theoretical things that, particularly in left literature, about what potentially could happen, but is it based in the
Yeah.
reality of what's happening right now? Part
Mm.
of our thing is that trying to, in part, make sure that we maintain our structures and that people get fed and that other legit survival gear is provided and that there's a community of people. Because one of the other things that happened with COVID is a shattering of that personal meeting of each other and talking to each other and sharing ideas in person rather than through Zoom or through other things like that. So we find that a lot of that is what is threatening to the state, is the fact that a lot of people are getting together and they're outside of control of the state, and that we are doing what we think is best, independent of what governments have to say about what we're doing.
Yeah.
On the same token, though, I think there was another. Food Not Bombs can't actually feed the whole country with recovered food, right? First of all, you
Yeah.
have to have, and then we tried growing. We grew a lot of food in New Mexico, and but the thing was that then you had to do, no way that it could have fed us all through the year, even though we grew a lot of food, and it was amazingly hard work. And we were in alliance with actually livestock farmers that graze their cattle next to us, and we had like and there was literally clear the why livestock in the desert is an important source of food, because growing vegetables is not really all that easy. And also grain, it was easier to grow grains for cattle than it was to wheat and so on to make bread.
Yeah.
So
I love how you put that that y'all keep showing up, but still that there still needs to be an articulated plan, agenda, whatever you want to call it, a direction that we're going to really unify around. So Kamau and I think I'm sorry, I already let you go on that question, but to sort of wrap it up and get to final thoughts, I just really want to share like still how we're thinking about um the way to fill those gaps that we're all talking about, because it is wild that some of the most politically developed on the left, people who built things, people who've had successes in some cases, are still at a loss about this question. So it does seem like one of the most pressing questions. And so we're going to continue to facilitate conversations around answering that. And obviously being able to get more practical and more into our plan, our agenda, and what we're proposing to the left, and hoping that people on the left get behind, and obviously broader. And we've been working at this for a few months, really in the social investigation stage of it all, holding people's assemblies, really walking in the tradition of people like these panelists, some of the blueprints they've already laid out, like making sure we have food at the people's assemblies, even little things like that. But we have been able to see, I mean, because we've at this point over the few months and over the few different cities, and now about 300 people of a base from the people's assemblies, and talk to hundreds more than that. Obviously, the numbers of actual like follow through are lower. So, but we just talk to a bunch of people and we get a sentiment that people are ready to unify around struggle, that people are fed up, people are politicized in some sense. And part of the problem is that there's not enough good politics to participate in. It's a lot of the bad stuff, a lot of the top down stuff, a lot of the NGO or state run stuff. And so our task, as revolutionaries in the United States, um, we feel very tasked with cultivating a culture of good politics again, cultivating a culture of like good struggle again. And yeah, we're like really committed to that. And the way we see good politics is that the actual like investigation and being amongst the people and having the agenda come through the people, but obviously influenced by historical and political perspective. Um, and yeah, it's been super inspiring to start this process, and we are always like, it's like a living agenda, or a living vision that we have, because even through our people's assemblies, like actual lumpen people are contributing to the ideas and where we're going. So we just want to lift good politics up, and we're having a hard time doing that when we were just foot soldiers looking for fights that challenge power. And so we're stepping into that gap, and with a visitor, but we're stepping into that gap and hoping that people will join us in shaping that, because so many people are saying that we need the same thing. And I'm telling you that no one's gonna come save us. We have to build it. It's not gonna spark out of thin air. It's not gonna come through spontaneous uprisings. We're gonna have to organize it. So we're throwing all of our energy, we're throwing our hat into it, into that fight and into that struggle of bringing about a culture of good politics in this country again. And so I want to give everyone just a chance to kind of wrap up on that note. And also, I guess, what in wrapping up, like where did this conversation leave you, I guess, in where your mind, because like as political people, anytime we get into these discussions, our mind gets like sparking and ideas start flowing. So in this conversation and moving forward, because I'd love to continue facilitating these, we have Kali Akuno, Dr. Youssef, different people who are struggling and who want to also struggle around this question. So I just want to get a closing, just to respect y'all's time, just closing kind of wrapping up thoughts on what this conversation leaves you with, and yeah, where are you going from here personally? I'll start with you, Kamau.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the conversation. I've not worked directly with you guys, but I've heard of your work, and I hold it in high esteem in terms of the organizing I've seen, the good organizing that I've seen around the country. So I think where this conversation leads me is, one, to continue to support the work that you guys are doing, particularly the work around Jamila that you're pointing out around, Jamia that you're pointing out around the 2027 work, the possible strike, mass movements, mass actions that should take place. I think that's very exciting work, and work that needs to happen. It needs to happen again in big ways. I think we as movement people need to think bigger as opposed to smaller. And I think part of what struck me was to be in conversation with people who have created national organizations or national networks, or have those understandings of the amount of not only resources of any sort of monetary sense, but the people resources and the binding of these people together to create movement ecosystems and atmospheres and work that push and move the movement forward, that doesn't fall down when one person leaves, that doesn't let one fight break up a whole organization, but understands that the movement should continue, that organizations, as long as they're doing good work, should continue, and that we have to build a movement that's strong enough to challenge the capitalist ecosystem, because otherwise we are going to be doomed to failure. And so our small projects have to move into bigger projects. They have to connect. They have to have networks. They have to build collectives. They have to build parties and mass movements. And that's the direction that I think we should be headed towards. And I think this conversation was further confirmation for me of that. And I appreciate being included on the panel. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for your contribution and the continued work that I'm sure we're all going to end up doing together. So I want to bring it to you, Keith, especially since Kamau did like recognize you directly. And like, I want to echo his same sentiments that it's very useful to be able to get lessons from people who've built national movements, international. So, yep, right to you, Keith.
Yeah, well, one thing I appreciated was to not be trying to organize the general strike and those ideas next week, because it takes a long time to do things. And like the lead up to do Occupy took, I know a bunch of us were proposing that in about 10 or 15 years before Occupy happened as a possible strategy. And there was a bunch of failed attempts over and over again to launch that. And so the longevity of organizing and having a strategy is really important. Also, bringing on having a much more mass base of that brings in people who have shared very similar perspectives on what the crisis of capitalism is, and some kind of molding a dream of what could be post-capitalist world that we somehow would be able to create. And I think that if, for instance, something that's happening, in 2027 really would be the starting point of something ultimately, because it's going to take really a long time. There's a book that I read years ago called Portraits of Anarchists in the Spanish Civil War, or I think that's what it was called. And they talked about how many they'd been working with peasants for a couple of generations before it got to that point where they actually had ability to mobilize against Franco. But and that the thing that was inspiring about that book is how the people just kept going and going, even though they were dead long before any kind of peasant cooperation started happening. The other thing is that I find the people that we share food with at Food Not Bombs chapters have a much more sophisticated political worldview than liberals and Republicans, and that they also have a ton of skills. The issue is that there isn't really, they don't have a certain level of freedom to actually move this into some kind of positive way easily, because they have to survive. And I think a lot of America is completely fed up with what's going on, would be open to radical change, but there's no real, it's up to us to figure out like a way to unify people, to invite them to participate, and to have some kind of direction that that they would be in support of. Because I do think, particularly in America's fed up with what's going on.
Yeah.
And American people, there is a huge, we have people living in Teslas that eat with Food Not Bombs. They live in a Tesla. Can you imagine that? We have Tesla workers that eat with us because they've been laid off recently from from charging. So these.
Yeah, I definitely.
It's an amazing connection that you can have, but how to reach all these people, have some kind of unified direction, could be very, very powerful, but it's going to take a lot of thinking outside the box to figure out. It might not be the way that past revolutions have happened. It might not be, it's going to be completely, and in fact, it may be oddly enough, I remember in one Food Not Bombs, we had a member of San Francisco Food Not Bombs, and he, he made a proposal that we ban money from all of America and that no more money should be used. Right? We're like, well, we are not really in a position of power where we can determine that.
Yeah, realistic demands is definitely going to be.
But what was interesting about this man is every once in a while there would be a question for the group that no one could figure out. But because he was such a thinking outside the box person, that every 10th suggestion that he had would be the mind-bending thing that would go, oh my God, how come we didn't think of that? That is absolutely the best solution. So having been open-minded to a person who had very unusual, unrealistic ideas most of the time, every once in a while came up with the idea that transformed the direction of our group. So
thank you for that. And what about you, Arun? Closing closing outlooks basically, and wrapping up the conversation and feelings towards the conversation.
I'm grateful for this conversation and to be included. I think we're wrestling with some real hard questions. I would just caution that millions of people being fed up and looking for radical change is how we got Donald Trump. So it doesn't necessarily translate into political action in any particular direction. It has to do with who galvanizes it, mobilizes it, who has the ideological and material resources. And that said, I think it's important to just keep on keeping on, keep involved in the struggle. There will be moments where we're born anew, where there's a renaissance, and it's important to really build institutions, not nonprofits, not liberal groups, not electoralism, but radical militant infrastructure that can sustain and nurture the movement for the long haul.
I think that's perfect. I think y'all wrapped it up completely perfectly, because that's exactly how Mass Party is thinking about it. That's what we're trying to do with Good Politics, is foster more of that in America, where we feel like we've lost some of that, or feel like we just don't have the answers, and there's some course correcting that needs to happen. So thank y'all, genuinely so much. I've been watching and learning from all of y'all's perspectives in different ways and applying it to what we're doing. And even before I ever try to take this crack at it with Mass Party and actually filling the gaps, y'all's work has been instrumental in guiding this. So thank you. Looking forward, obviously, to the next conversation. Thank y'all all for watching. And if y'all don't have anything else, if no one has anything else, we're going to get out of here. And I hope y'all have a good night and happy New Year. I'm just, I'm elated. Where we're going from here is only up. That's what Mass Party thinks. And we're excited and here for the long haul.
Yay.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank y'all so much.